That's my opener today. Drooping.
Uh, that needs to be the opener every day.
And there's no novelty of coming up with brand new stuff every single time. You know
I
what? You know what
love.
I don't like to share? I don't like to share how I do my stuff. That stuff specifically, because I'm not a fan of transparency. I don't want to live like my life is in a fishbowl.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you this: do you think? Let's start really elevated, 30,000 foot, whatever the cliche is, and work down. Yeah, up there.
Up here, we're up here in the
Way
low clouds,
higher. Yeah,
the
higher.
highest clouds.
Yeah, like cruising altitude.
Got it. I'm cruising.
From a pilot from a family of pilots, you should understand that.
I don't understand that. They taught me nothing.
They taught you things.
Right, but not about flying.
Did you not want to know?
No. I mean, by the time I cared about flying, I had hit that. I had hit that age where your parents don't know anything because you're a teenager. And then after that, then I was like all the way old enough. But by then it had been 15 years since they were flying.
So I'm always curious. I'm to the end of the world curious about that, like how we get from where we started to where we are, and what right turn, had it been a left turn, would have led to something different. So I'm interested in how you didn't end up being a pilot.
I mean, so both my parents were in the Air Force. My dad was a pilot. My mom was not. And when it was time to consider, uh, like JROTC in high school or ROTC for college or applying to the academies, which was basically the steps I would have taken to more or less follow their path or follow their path plus a little. There was an active war going on in Afghanistan that I don't think my parents wanted to send a kid to. I don't think there's anything more to it than that. I mean, they never said don't be a this or don't be a that, but I think in their mind, the options for how to be a pilot are you join the military and get your training that way and then become an airliner pilot, which my dad had made the choice that he didn't want to be an airline pilot because the hours and work-life balance were atrocious. Pay was apparently good, but then then it ended up being prescient because the pay went way down. Not long after it would have been my turn to be signing up for that. To be honest, the question is, how did I not become a blogger? That's a happy accident of fate that I managed to dodge the bullet of thinking I would be a professional blogger.
Yeah, I think you're one of those unique people that I don't throw around compliments a lot, but whatever you wanted to do, and to this day, whatever you want to do, you could do.
Within reason, that's probably true.
Yeah.
Within reason, but I'm a man of modest ambitions. You know, when it comes down to it, I want to be happy and contented, which is not a small goal. You know, for when you look around at the number of people who've achieved that, it's not a small goal. But that's really what I'm after. All the
Yeah.
rest is kind of secondary.
Well, there's a lot there, but where we started on this before I did my usual derail.
Well, do you find it ironic that while I'm talking about wanting to not be under a microscope, that I'm also telling everybody what I want to be and like
Yes.
my fundamental goals?
Yeah. So I think there's the, I want to start with the institutional version of this conversation. That's what I'm really
The
interested in.
institutional version
Of
of
transparency.
transparency, meaning transparency into your day-to-day life.
No, meaning transparency. Would you say now versus some decade or sometime in the past that the institution, let's choose two, and we could do this with every one of them, the institution of church or religion or the institution of government has become more or less transparent?
More, but I don't feel like either one is becoming transparent. I feel like they're both more transparent by way of the third thing, which is entering the information age.
Well, I don't care how.
I mean, sure, like the fact that you can find information about all the denominations. I don't think even 50 years ago, if you didn't have a Unitarian Universalist church in your town, like you're going to find a book in the library, find the Unitarians, and then eventually like go a couple towns over, go to increasingly big cities until you find the Unitarians. If you don't have
So
a Seventh-day Adventist church, how are you going to find that? If you don't have a like some obscure Louisville sect of the Baptists, you're not going to know that that exists. That's a half a second away from me at any time on Wikipedia now.
well, fun fact: Southern Baptist Theological Seminary, headquartered in Louisville. It's a,
Southern Baptist Theological Seminary.
yeah, it's a beautiful campus too. A beautiful campus.
Here's a conversation I had about a church recently. I was talking about the church government. This must have been with a family member. But I'm like, how does so and so church get governed compared to the Catholic Church, where the hierarchy of who's running the Catholic Church kind of ends at the Pope, and then above that God, right? And this is the hierarchy: God, the Pope, a bunch of stuff I don't understand, the priest, the congregants. There is a large gap in there that is beyond my scope of understanding. But I can find the global church governance, organizations and hierarchies, and who reports to who, and where does money come from, and how are donations split up, and are there other sources of revenue for these churches, and how do you become a pastor, and who's allowed to become all that stuff. Bam, it's right there. So I mean, by itself, I think clearly makes the case that it's more transparent now.
Okay, so let's go even seedier than that.
Seedier,
As in, I don't want. I'm bored with the salacious details, but just conceptually,
yeah.
The abuse scandals of the past 15 years in really all churches, but one specific denomination, Catholicism. The abuse scandals, those weren't covered in the 50s. Nobody knew about that, or it was confined to the family that dealt with those issues. Do we know more or less now about sort of the inner workings of things like that in the institution of religion?
Oh man,
Jim Baker, Jimmy Swaggart, like the 700 Club, the PTL, like all of these things that went for decades unmolested in religion. Starting in the 80s, like the veil began to be removed. In that context, like all of the sort of malfeasance.
I don't think that's it.
It's not. I like it though. But all of those bad things that, for 40, 50, 60, 70 years were sort of staples in pop culture in the 80s began to be exposed. I'd say similarly with government, when my parents and their generation turned on Walter Cronkite, that was your vehicle to understanding the world and policy. And your congressman or senator was, buttoned up and a good person. Well, I think it's accelerated in the past, say, 10 years with the internet. Internet obviously is before that, but it's really accelerated in the past 10 years. But we know more about the malfeasance of elected officials in this country. I think government is more transparent, and it's ugly. It's ugly, but is the ugliness any more or less than it ever has been? And I like that question. That's really what I think. That's what I would be interested in hearing your take on.
Well, I mean, bad people have been doing bad things for a long time.
A long time. Exactly. Is there more?
There's a biblical story about that. Something about maybe a snake, some kind of a snake story.
Yeah. I think I might have heard something about that one.
Can you imagine though, if think of all the original sin stories that we don't know? Like some undiscovered people that's been uncontacted by the West, and they've got some origin story, and their origin story, if you were to have it to lay out next to original sin, there would be some fundamental similarities to it. I'd be like, oh man, we're all the same.
Will you
Or
under
or it would be completely the other direction. Like, oh man, we have nothing in common with these people.
wouldn't that be fun to like do like have a if you could come across the book or do it yourself, like all of the origin stories, chronicle those?
that would be that would be excellent.
Yeah.
My institution of transparency that I'll use as an example is worse than the church or government.
Oh,
Probably seedier. So I'm not a true crime person, meaning I don't commit true crime and I don't enjoy the
I
true
know
crime
where you're
genre
headed.
very much. But every once in a while, particularly because I was a big horror movie fan for a long time, and then I watched the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which was not directly inspired by a true story, but the bad guy, the chainsaw murderer of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, he was inspired by an actual serial killer. And like I read some of the stories and there was like recordings of his interviews with the police about what he was saying to the police while he was, confessing or, semi confessing to these crimes. And I'm like, first of all, the word psychopath, totally apt here. And second of all, I'm like, how can anybody do that to anybody else? Like the torture stuff, the horrifically distant whatever. And I'm like, I don't ever want to know these details about this serial killer history. And I thought to myself, like you'd read the stories of how these people found victims. And I'm not saying there are not serial killers now, but with the benefit of 30 years of history, the famous serial killer stories of the mid 1900s to the, call it like the 90s or so. I mean, like there's the pattern is so consistent across some things that were always the same, and that's what leads to this, the true crime and the psychological drama, but based on a true story stuff, like Mindhunter, a profile of a serial killer or whatever. And I'm like, I the naivete that it would take to fall for the specific sort of victimization that took place then, it always struck me as being of a different time. Like someone was the first person, someone, not only was someone the first person to take candy from a guy in a white van, somebody was the second and the third and the fourth and the 12th and the 20th and the 50th. And it's like now it's very funny, that don't take candy from the guy in the white van. Now it's some random new thing. And then fast forward, like you've got what's the dude that would be showing up at your house and to catch a predator. He'd sit you down and
oh,
like,
Hanson.
yeah, Chris Hansen. If he shows
Yeah.
up in your house, you're in trouble.
Yeah.
And like that's now 15, 20 years old, right? And so these eras of like horrific crime enabled by the innocence of your neighborhood and the community, and then the innocence of the early internet and chat rooms, and like I can't even get my head around what it is now, other than that I know if I make it 20 more years to be reading neo Wikipedia, then I'm probably going to fall down exactly the same holes and be horrified by exactly the same sort of how could anybody have been so foolish. And that'll all be, not rose-colored glasses, but it'll all be, ex post staring back and be like, well, hindsight is 2020. Maybe it would have the imagination of what it takes to be in that like veil of not even ignorance, but in that time and of that time. It takes a mental toll. That's why I try not to read the Wikipedia pages for serial killers anymore.
I love that. God, there's a lot there to go through. But I think I'm coming around to this sort of, and it's not formalized yet, but like this prism of seeing things where there is nothing new, and it's like freeing and exhausting at the same time. I feel like these are all the same. Like there are no changes, just the details. Like everything's. I feel like with transparency, and this is what I was interested in this discussion. With transparency, we can see more behind the screen, whether it's the institution of government, whether it's church, whether it's your neighborhood, whether it's policing, whatever the institution is. As you see more of it, you're horrified and you think that at some point in time in the past, it was better at that point. And it's exactly as you just explained with taking candy from the person in the white van. It's the naivete of that new institution, whether it's television or radio or the town crier or the court
The written
jester.
word,
Yeah,
the
the
written
written
word.
word, like chase it all the way back. It's a new vehicle, there's a new medium, but it's still the same human story being retold over and over. And we see after a certain amount of time, we see behind the institution. We see behind the curtain of the institution, and we think, oh my God, everything's awful. This is different. This is, we're at some horrible point in time because now I can see what's actually been happening since the beginning of time,
Right.
but just my naivete is now exposed to me. And
Does it stress you out?
I love it.
So no, it doesn't stress you out.
It makes me like things. I don't know. I think there's a disappointment for me, like a bittersweet, a nostalgic feeling in the comfort of ignorance of things past. Like the more you see, the more you understand, the more disappointing it is. And I think that's like why, people like Dostoevsky and the psalmist David have quotes around, in Proverbs actually, so Solomon, but have quotes around the more you know, the bigger the sorrow, the more you see, the bigger, the sadder you are for that reason. It's, for me, there's a nostalgia to, oh yeah, the news person that my parents watch every night, that is the North Star. That is the source of truth. We trust this person. Government really is, the politicians that you see on television really they do have the best interest of their people. And then you get older and you realize that it was your naivete, that they've always been that's always existed. The church was always abusing kids. Politicians were always greasy and corrupt, tinkering on the margins. But now we get to see it, and we get to see behind the curtain, I think, a little more than, at least maybe at my age. I wonder if older generations have experienced that sort of awakening. I don't think so, because
Yeah,
anyway.
but you're living right now and somebody else's used to be. Like some future person is going to sit there and be like, "Man, back in 2024, those schmucks didn't know anything. Can you
Yeah.
imagine not knowing that microplastics were eating all of our colons from the inside out?" Those
Yeah.
idiots. Yeah,
Yeah.
smoking was good for you 100 years ago.
Yeah. It was prescribed by doctors, as was heroin and other things. But yeah, I, there's a balance. There's a balance for me in understanding that the human story is the same and remains constant. And just because we're able to see more of the bad parts of that human story doesn't mean that the human story is any worse or any better. It
This
just
is
means that we see the bad parts.
this is a great endorsement for you to go read books. Not fiction. Like, don't forget it. The ship has sailed on fiction. I don't see you reading a fiction book anytime soon.
I do read books.
Yeah. I know we've talked about this. You read How to R, Your Path to Better
No,
Data Science.
no, I've got a bunch of other stuff too.
This is the time. If you revert to your philosophical studies, you will find that we've said nothing new. But you'll be comforted in the fact that as you find those guys or those authors who are saying the stuff that you were thinking all along, you'll think, oh man, these guys have totally got it down. And you'll think, was I just unintentionally copying them this whole time, and it just sort of like percolated into my mind from all around me, or was there an intent? Like how did I know this stuff that was out there before me, but I never studied it and I didn't read it, and I still somehow ended up absorbing it and coming to that path? And then you won't worry about it because you'll just hunker down and keep reading and think about how we all stare up at the same moon and live under the same stars and we all bleed red blood.
Yeah. I don't know. I just think, I guess for me, it's the clarity on or the clarity for me is that church didn't suddenly go from a thing to another thing. It's just we see what it's always been.
Do you ever get frustrated that you can't even follow the breadcrumbs for all of the things of interest? So, like Bible churches, like a big mega church of today, particularly a U.S. phenomenon mostly. I would love to trace the roots of big Bible churches, mega churches, but man, it would take me so long just to consume tracing the roots of big Bible churches. And then there's how many other things do I want to trace the roots of? Like
Yeah.
literally everything we bring up, every episode, we've got 20 different things that I'd like to go get a PhD on, tracing, just doing nothing but piecing together, the oral history of whatever that thing is. And so I'm left with no choice but to focus on birds and deep water exploration. This is what I have to do.
That is the real frustration for me, though. We talk about that a lot. That's a real frustration for me, is that all of the things that can be known or understood, I'll never grasp a fraction of the things that can be known.
This was why I walked into the transparency discussion. I may be a little biased. I may have had a foregone conclusion here. My foregone conclusion was, yeah, there are things that are more transparent. Also, what difference does that make to anything?
Fair.
But I mean, I'm also biased because I'd already made this up before we even started the conversation, and I'm
I,
very closed-minded about whatever your side is here.
I didn't know you'd pull the nihilist card on me, though.
You didn't know that I would pull a nihilist card.
Well, I mean, you've had, you know, you've given indications in prior conversations, but like that's a full blown nihilist card.
Um, I played the nihilist card. I wonder what I could do to take back the nihilist card. How could I? Well, the options here are: we know more than we used to, and we can do something with that information. Okay, that's good. We know more than we used to. We can't do something with that information. Oh, that's just like insanely frustrating. We know we don't know more than we used to, and there's nothing we can do with that with the fact that we don't know anymore.
I think most people live in that quadrant.
It's the same as it ever was, and
Exactly.
nothing matters. So like, can I binge some Netflix?
Is that it?
I don't know. I feel like I'm trying to I'm poking around the edges of a worldview that you have crystal clear in your mind, and I'm like 62% to even understanding what it is. Forget about agreeing or disagreeing. I'm trying to get to what are the things that make the man and drive your motivations.
I think it's I think there. Okay, so I think I am guilty of a recency bias in really what I'm explaining is there was a period of time in my life due to naivete. Metaphorically, I was the kid taking candy from the guy in the white van because I had some blind faith in the institutions, all the institutions, all of them.
And you don't think you are now? You think it's like that's the old you?
I know it's the old me, but I see it very mathematically now. I see it mathematically in the sense that, oh, well, it's not like the politicians of today are unique in their corruption. That's something that's existed for a long time. We can just see it now.
Is it nihilistic for me to say that your eyes will never be fully open because it used to be candy from a van, then it was
Yeah.
ice cream from a truck,
Then it's
then
taking the hemlock willingly.
yeah, I mean, like there's no end to this. There's
No.
always another con ready to
Yeah.
take you. And being gullible is just part of the human nature. Like so you got gullibility, I fell for it. And then you got hubris. I don't fall for it anymore. That's the old me. And I don't think you're as simplistic as that to be like, no, old me was gullible and young and dumb. New me is no longer gullible and I am wise now. Because that is the most gullible thing you could possibly be saying about yourself now.
I think you're using gullible and naive interchangeably, and I think there's a distinction.
Well, I mean, naive explicitly means you lack experience.
Yeah.
So
No.
you can have been gullible and naive, then you're no longer naive because you have experience, but you're falling for stuff that's a different set of stuff. Now, I
You know, the best example, go ahead.
I feel like at any moment somebody else is going to be pointing and laughing at me for having followed the crowd into the obviously dumb thing. So, the tulip bubble in this is like a famous economic example was there was a tulip craze. Everybody invested in tulips and then the bottom fell out of the market and everybody else was like, you idiots, you speculators. Of course you failed. There's tulips. Why, how could you have ever thought that this was a good investment? And I feel like at any moment things could be like, oops, mutual funds were a bad idea and the whole financial system comes unraveled. And how could you have possibly thought that putting your money into, a 401k and an IRA and having all your money in mutual funds and letting some money manager manage your money, why did you think that was going to work, you dummies? And then all of us are going to look like fools. And I'll be like, I'm right along. I'm the fools, not the smart guy.
Yeah.
I know you don't watch movies, especially action movies or science fiction movies. I don't see myself as the hero of a movie.
No.
I see myself as one of the unnamed people who dies early on in the movie.
I'm a set extra. That's how I see myself. I'm an extra.
I see you as the set.
Okay. You gotta elaborate a little bit on that one.
Steady. I'm like,
a one-word answer
establishes the tone.
If the zoological calling doesn't work out for you, the other thing that you missed early in your career was Westerns. I can picture you, sort of adjusting the brim of your cap steady.
Yeah.
Like you're good with the one-word answers.
I can picture you as the facade of a saloon with the doors. That's Terry.
Flapping in the wind? More
the doors. The cowboy kicks through the doors, and then behind them, the two swinging doors. They go,
I don't know.
You know what I'm talking about?
No.
I can't. This is not saloon. Front of a saloon. There's got to be a bar fight in there. There's going to be a bar fight because you hear the jangle of spurs and boot heels on the wooden whistle. Sidewalk and the whistle. Yeah. And then you see cowboy hat above the doors. You're now viewing it from the inside. You see cowboy hat above the doors. You see cowboy boots below the doors. The doors, and I really can't emphasize this motion and sound enough. The doors slam open. Cowboy walks through the doors, and then the doors behind him. And the piano stops playing. Everyone turns and stares at the outsider.
And it's you putting the hat on.
Yeah.
As you say, steady. Single word.
Right. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I have a very clear vision of what role you would play in this Western. And you have a very clear vision of what role I would play.
I think I'm offended by the fact that I'm swinging doors of a saloon.
No. You're the whole set, not just the doors. That's one part of it. Also, I mean, if I'm calling you the doors, that's a pretty flattering thing.
Well, yeah.
We've barely scratched the surface. I need a report on my desk by 8 a.m. tomorrow with your findings so far, your preliminary results, Exhibit A through F, and we're going to use that to unpack the rest of this. I need to know more about Terry's transparency.
Yeah. Well, we have interviews tomorrow, so we're not discussing this tomorrow.
You've whetted my appetites. It's with an H. W-H-E-T.
I know that's the worst word ever, though.
Whetted?
That's like whetted. I don't know. Maybe not the worst word. There are more, but I'm not a fan.
Hey, thanks for giving me a window into your somewhat confusing soul.
Yeah. Thanks for calling me gullible.
No. It was a warning not to be gullible.
And swinging saloon doors.
I did call you the set of a Western.
And you gave me sound effects too.
And with that,